It was very jarring. We had observed a ship hit the shark. These discoveries were like started or inspired by people who had started to observe different sharks around the area.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Ocean Talks. This week we are talking to Alexandra McInturf. She's a PhD in animal behavior from the University of California, Davis. She is currently with the Big Fish Lab at Oregon State University, where she focuses on the diet and habitat use of salmon sharks in Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, and how that affects prey species in the region. She's also exploring the social lives of basking sharks in Ireland, something I'm very interested to talk to her about. Hey, Alex, how's it going?
Going well, Carlos. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been, just thinking about last week a lot. In case you guys didn't follow my YouTube live last week, I spent 7 days on the water with the Big Fish Lab, who's consulting and advising me on a special project involving great white sharks. And Alex happened to be there with us. That was a pretty wild week, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was super fun. We got to see some cool stuff.
We saw plenty of great white sharks last week. And what we saw was the most surprising thing about it all is we saw so many breaches, right?
Yeah, we definitely saw a few of them, which I think is super cool because seeing breaches for any shark is just like a wild phenomenon. So, yeah, it's fun to see the little ones jumping out here too.
I counted a total of 7 breaches that we saw last week, 5 great whites and 2 thresher sharks.
Yeah, I missed a few of them. This always happens to me. Like I'm on the water, looking around, and then they're always like breaching right behind me. But I'm really glad that you got some on camera.
We did. And I wish we got the one that breached right next to our boat. I'm not kidding. That one was, it probably splashed you.
Yeah, it probably did. I literally turned around. It was like a gunshot. I turned around, and all I saw was the wake that it left. So, yeah, I mean, it was a fun little surprise. I don't think we got a camera on that one though.
No, no, we had 2 research boats. We were both parked next to each other, and we were just sitting there waiting for sharks to appear. And basically, a great white shark breached right between the 2 boats. Man, our boat got a really good view of it. It was so awesome. I've never been that close to a shark breach.
Yeah, I have one time and it was a basking shark. And basking sharks are huge animals, and I know we're going to talk about them today, but we're like talking a 20-foot creature just launching itself right next to your boat. And I didn't see that last one either. Like I just heard it. Again, same sort of situation. I knew the basking sharks were around and I turned around and all I saw was the wake. So I must just have really bad luck.
Well, you always got to keep your eyes peeled. In fact, here, I'm going to pull up just a quick clip of it real quick. Because it's 360 degrees, it looks really far, but it was much closer than this. Check this out.
Oh,
Oh,
It never gets old, does it?
no, it's always fun to watch. And you know what's also really cool, Carlos, is like the fact that these breaches, depending on the species, always look a little bit different. Like this little guy is just like, "Brr," but the basking sharks are just so floppy when they do
Hmm.
it. That's
That's a
what's hard.
juvenile white shark. It's cool, right?
Yeah, it's cool. That's like a baby ear jaws.
So, yeah, that was a cool week. I mean, the highlights were the breaches. I can't wait to share the project that we're working on together. It's going to take about a year to get this done, I think, but it's going to be pretty cool when we do it.
Yeah, the best things take time. I'm sure people will still be really interested in a year.
Nothing's easy in shark science, right?
That's so true. I think people don't always realize how hard it is to get the information we need sometimes.
Well, speaking of shark science, I want to learn a little bit about you. Well, actually, I know a lot because we spent 7 days on a boat together. But for the audience, you are from Ohio, right?
I am. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and my parents are still floored about my current career path.
Well, there's not very many sharks in Ohio. How the heck did you get into shark science?
Yeah, that's a super common question that I get. So, for sure, just so everybody's very clear, there are no sharks in Ohio. It's in the middle of the United States. Um, I think, Carlos, what I've been reflecting on, especially given that it's like the 50th anniversary of Jaws this year, is that people have been really scared about marine predators, and that's a supernatural reaction. And that's something that I felt really distinctly when I was young, and I always wanted to work with animals. But then growing up, the only opportunities I saw to do that was to become a vet. And that was all that I knew. And then we went to Florida one year, went to the beach. I found the ocean very intimidating, but also super fascinating. And again, I think the effect of Jaws on our collective psyche still really persists. So, you look out at the ocean and you're like, there's things out there that might be a little scary. And for me, for some reason, it just clicked. I remember when I was 12, standing on the beach and saying to my dad, can you like study the ocean? Is that a job? Like I was really intrigued, despite the fact that I was still a little bit nervous. And he said, yeah, but my dad's an architect. And he was like, I think that's called marine biology, but you're gonna have to look that up, right? Like my family had no understanding of kind of the direction I needed to take. So honestly, I decided I wanted to be a shark biologist that year in that moment. And I feel very lucky to be living out my childhood dream.
Well, something you did um, was pretty, I guess, pivotal in that career change was, and I say this because I have a lot of young viewers who ask me questions about how to become a marine biologist and things like that. And just because you're landlocked in Ohio, for example, that shouldn't hold you back from wanting to work on the ocean or be a marine biologist. But you volunteered at an aquarium at an early age, right?
I did, yes. You've done your research. Yes. So again, I didn't have a lot of access to the water. I feel so jealous of people who were like, I got to grow up surfing, right in my backyard. And I'm like, less than 50% of states in our country touch the water, right? And so there are so few opportunities for people to actually observe animals. And one of the ways I was able to do it very fortunately was to take advantage of a local resource, which was the Newport Aquarium in Kentucky. It was an amazing place. I worked with the Wave Foundation there. And that really allowed me to continue to explore my interest, even though I didn't have constant access to like the beach.
Well, being landlocked definitely shouldn't hold you back. And you just spent 7 days watching great white sharks breaching, so you're kind of living the dream right now, right?
I know it's so funny. I feel very fortunate. I get to do a lot of field work, and every time I go on a trip like that, I just have to pinch myself a little bit. I'm just out there. I'm like, we're in Southern California. I'm hanging out with some incredible people, and I have the opportunity to get really up close and personal with these animals.
It really is incredible being out there. I consider myself completely fortunate to be able to do this as well and be surrounded by such great intellectual minds in the field. Speaking of the field, you are working at the Big Fish Lab right now, and that is at Oregon State University. Tell me about the Big Fish Lab. What do you guys got going there?
Well, as background, so I did my PhD in animal behavior, as you mentioned, at UC Davis. And California is pretty known for its sharks, as you know.
Hmm.
And I graduated with my PhD in 2021, and Dr. Taylor Chappell had founded the Big Fish Lab up at Oregon State in 2019. And he kind of recruited me to come up there. And I remember thinking, like, why the heck am I going to Oregon to study sharks? Like, why am I leaving California to go to Oregon? What I think is so cool, though, about the Big Fish Lab is we now have Dr. Taylor Chappell, who is a white shark expert. He's been studying white sharks for over 20 years. And then Dr. James Sulikowski recently joined us, and he's a shark mom expert. So we have, to your point, all these very cool minds up there in Oregon. And Oregon, as it turns out, is actually this really unexplored frontier for shark research because we know that there are about 15 different species there, but no one's been up there really studying them. There's been a couple of papers or researchers that have been really focused on that, but they've largely retired. And so everything we learn up there is kind of new. And the number of times I tell people I'm studying sharks in Oregon and they go, I didn't even know we had sharks here. It's like incredible. It always blows my mind. So, yeah, so up there we study the 15 shark species of Oregon. They range in size from like a foot or two long, like Pacific spiny dogfish, to historically the basking shark, which we're going to talk about today. We get white sharks up there as well. And a lot of the techniques we use can also be applied globally. So that's why we travel sometimes to work with folks like yourself. And I've just been really impressed by kind of the research program we've been able to build in the last few years. We have a ton of undergraduate interns, graduate students, all focused on a variety of topics from what sharks are eating to whether it's microplastics to how sharks are moving and behaving. It's just been an incredible sort of opportunity to see growth in a new research program.
Well, I have to say, the Big Fish Lab is the coolest name for a research lab that I've ever heard.
Taylor will be happy to hear that.
That sounds like something Taylor would name. Did he come up with that name? Do you know?
Oh, he for sure did. Yes, he did.
He was probably eating a lot of snacks at the time.
He did. Yeah. For those who don't know, Taylor Chapel loves to eat on the boat. And I think it blew everyone's minds last week when they saw just how much he can snack.
Oh yeah, we had one full briefcase and Pelican of equipment, and then two Pelicans of snacks just to hold him over.
Okay, snacks are very important though. Very good for
Yeah. But you guys are doing some pretty good stuff up there in Oregon. In fact, recently I think you guys got you documented two shark species in Puget Sound for the first time, right?
We did, yes. And again, so our work kind of spans throughout the Pacific Northwest at this point. And we've talked, Carlos, a lot about this, right? You don't have to have a PhD to be a scientist. And a lot of these discoveries were like started or inspired by people who had started to observe different sharks around the area. We just followed up on some of those inquiries, which has been really, really exciting. So it's been kind of an interesting way to see how community scientists can be out there observing different features of their environments and how that can lend a hand in learning more about science.
And those were broad-nosed seven-gill sharks and in a critically endangered species. What was that? The
The
taupe
super or taupe,
taupe
yes.
shark. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll have to put some images of those sharks up on the screen because I'm not very familiar with those two sharks.
Well, it's funny. A lot of people aren't because, again, if we talk about Jaws, which is something, again, I've been thinking a lot about, so it's probably going to
Hmm.
come up a lot today. Most people think of white sharks when they think of sharks, right? But there's over 500 different species and they come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, we saw threshers, I think you mentioned last
Hmm.
week.
Yeah, those threshers that we saw, I've never seen threshers at the surface in the area where we were. So that was a super cool surprise for me. I just thought that was awesome. And we saw them breaching too.
Yeah, of course I missed the breach, but I did see them at the surface. I've never seen a live one. I've only ever seen them washed up in Oregon. So that was such a cool moment for me too.
Well, by the time I got the drone over there, the thresher had gone down. But to describe it, we saw a thresher shark batting bait fish at the surface with its tail. And that was totally cool. I mean, it was up there just smashing fish, and then it would grab them and eat them, and then dive back down.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. We were all looking over there. There was like something in the water, and a few of us were like, "What is happening over there?" And it's the top of the tail that you're seeing, which is awesome.
Yeah, pretty incredible. So let's talk about what I've wanted to talk to you about for a long time. And I had so many questions about basking sharks last week when we were on the boat that I held back so that I could talk to you about them on in this platform. And we're talking about basking sharks. One of the things that you are actually known worldwide for now, thanks to a major uh, paper and video footage that your team captured in Ireland, basking sharks.
Yeah, so basking sharks are one of my favorite species of shark, which I'm probably not supposed to have because I'm a bit objective shark biologist, but they're such incredible animals. I mean, they can reach 25 feet long. They are larger than white sharks. They eat plankton. They're one of three filter feeding shark species. They're actually a fun fact about them is that they're apex predators. So they're at the top of like a super tiny food chain. It's like phytoplankton, which are like the tiny little plants throughout the world's oceans, and then zooplankton, which are the tiny little creatures eating those plants. And then that's what the basking shark eats. So, a lot of people think of apex predators as the, carnivorous white shark, but basking sharks are also apex predators despite the fact that they eat plankton.
I
And
did not know that.
yeah,
I
I
never
know,
thought
right?
of a basking shark as an apex predator.
Yeah, I know. I feel like it's something I like to share with people because that's a super common reaction. They are endangered, and part of my PhD was studying sightings patterns along the coast of California in particular. And those sightings have dropped dramatically since the middle of the 20th century, which is very unfortunate. So, just PSA to everybody who's on the water or lives in California, if you see a basking shark, I really want to know about it because that's a really good sign if we start to see them there. But unfortunately, it's really hard to find them at all in the Pacific. So our work often takes us to Ireland, which is one of the only global hotspots that still persists for the species. It's one of the only places where you can see them consistently, and they tend to show up there in April and May in these really large numbers, which is awesome.
So Before we go into Ireland, I'm curious because I live here. What's happened to the basking sharks here in the Eastern Pacific?
That's a super good question, and in my opinion, it's not overly clear. So they used to be much more common. They're thought to be part of a single population that roams from Baja, California in the winter months up to the coast of British Columbia in the summer months. And so it's thought that they were kind of moving up and down. There have been periods where they have been fished by artisanal, smaller scale fisheries in places like Morro Bay, for example. Those fisheries didn't last super long. It didn't seem like a viable option or a sustainable fishery. I think the feature or the factor that's had the largest impact on the basking shark population here, unfortunately, is a weird culling phenomenon where they used to be so abundant up in British Columbia that they were becoming entangled in fishing nets. There may have been some misperceptions that they were also consuming the salmon that these fishermen were targeting. So they were culled by the Canadian government from like the 1940s to the 1970s, roughly in that period. A crazy thing about that is that one of the ways they did this is they put a razor blade at the front of a giant vessel and drove through the shoals of sharks.
My
As
goodness.
so it's not great. And I do think, basking sharks are big animals. They take a long time to mature. They don't give birth to very many young. You're talking 2 to 6 babies. The gestation period is longer than a year. So it's hard for them to come back. But I am deeply curious, given that, that culling effort ended and the fisheries ended. We still haven't seen recovery here in the same way that we've seen in places like Ireland, where there used to be much larger scale fisheries.
Mhm.
And so that's something that we're now starting to think about. What's keeping that population down here? Because people do see them still, particularly in Southern California at the Channel Islands, for example. And I was keeping an eye out last week while we were out there and I didn't see any, but they are around still, but just in very few numbers.
It's interesting because if they and that's something I didn't know, by the way, that in 1940s that they actually culled them. Um, it's interesting because that happened in the 40s, and we're now seeing kind of the ramifications of that 80
Totally.
years later, right? It's
Totally. Yeah. And something I'm wondering, this year, starting in, I think, the winter time, people started to report them on social media. And this is again where community science becomes really important because there's not a centralized database for reporting sightings along the US West Coast here. We do have a centralized database in Ireland, which allows us to track sightings patterns there. And I'd like to set up something similar here. But until then, we're really dependent on what we see on socials. And I have seen a few different sightings this year, more than usual, at least as far as, what comes across my
Mhm.
feed. And so I am curious if at some point we are going to see more and more showing up. We're kind of at this point where I think they're either going to continue to be rare or they're going to come back. And I'm kind of keeping an eye on that to see which way it goes.
I wonder if changing water temperatures has anything to do with it.
I love that question because it certainly could, but a very recent finding by some colleagues of ours found that basking sharks, like some other species, including white sharks, can partially control their internal body temperature. So white sharks can do that. It's called regional endothermy, and that allows them to hunt in really cold temperatures because they can keep their body temperature warm. It's like an athlete constantly being warmed up. And we're finding that basking sharks can do something somewhat similar. It's not exactly the same, but it does allow them to occupy really cold habitats. Like very recently, a paper came out where they were moving throughout, Norwegian waters over the winter,
Wow.
which means that they can kind of occupy this broad range of temperatures from like 0 degrees Celsius to 24 degrees Celsius, which is quite broad. So I do think temperature might matter, but maybe not for them themselves, but perhaps the distribution of the plankton that they're eating.
Interesting. They're definitely beautiful sharks, but kind of goofy looking.
They're the derpiest shark in all of the ocean, is what I like to say.
I have personally never seen one. I've been close, up in Rhode Island, up in Cape Cod. There's quite a few of them up there, but I've never actually seen one. I can't wait till I see one. Hopefully in Ireland someday I'll see one.
Yeah, I will tell you, you should totally come over and check them out because the ones in Ireland, when you're in Cape Cod or when you're on the West Coast here, if you see them, they're often in maybe like small groups or single animals. Over in Ireland, they're constantly doing these really cool coordinated swimming behaviors, like following each other around or swimming in like a V formation like geese. It's such an incredible experience against just a beautiful backdrop of the landscape over there. And full disclosure, the first time I saw them, I did tear up a little bit.
Oh.
Just so you're prepared if you see them, that might happen to you.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about Ireland because I tell you, uh, I'm gonna roll this video real quick because you're working in a paradise. Like it, this is too cool. So this is your backyard when you go research sharks in Ireland. Look at that background, and it's like a fairy tale land. And then you got these amazing sharks. I assume that's you in the boat there, right?
Yeah,
Probably your team.
that's our team. Yeah. And honestly, what's so cool is like similar to what you were describing with the white sharks in Southern California. And now that I've been there, I've seen it too. You just go out. We're not chumming for them. We can't because they eat plankton. We can't fish for them the same way we might some other shark species. You just have to go out and look for fins.
Hmm.
We're very lucky that we get to kind of just roam that beautiful coastline daily when we're over there.
And these right here, are they mainly males or females? What's going on here? Why so many?
Great question. And it's something that we're still trying to figure out. Like, why is Ireland this place where they continue to show up? Right now, we're seeing mostly adult and subadult males and females. So they don't seem to distinguish. When they breach, it's both sexes as well. So there's still a ton to learn about kind of the dynamic of the animals that are over there.
It's hard to imagine that they breach. They like out of the water completely.
Okay, well, again, breaching is a really generous term for them because they will come all the way out of the water, but unlike the white shark clip you showed earlier, they don't come up straight. Usually they kind of come up sideways. It's more of a flop. But what's very cool is that they're actually closely related to white sharks, which you can kind of tell when they close their mouths. They look kind of similar, and they can reach speeds comparable to those of white sharks when they breach. So no one knows why that's the case because you certainly don't have to breach to ambush plankton, but it's something that we're still trying to figure out.
Well, they definitely look like great whites. Up on a first appearance, they can appear like a great white and be misidentified. I have to say that when I post great white shark footage, especially when they start flaring their gills and stuff, and they're diving, the footage that I posted before, the most common comment on all those videos from the Facebook world is that's a basking shark. That's a basking shark. So a lot of people mistake them. And in fact, a lot of the sightings in the UK that a lot of people think are great whites happen to be basking sharks, right?
Yeah, totally. And it's actually really funny you say that because very recently, earlier this year, or even a couple weeks ago, there was a sighting that went viral online of a basking shark. I think it was somewhere in New England, around the area near Woods Hole, where it looked exactly like the image from Jaws, where there's a giant fin coming out of the water and there's a boat there, and people in the restaurant are filming this. And it's totally Jaws-esque, but it's definitely a basking shark. And so it's kind of this funny, perspective on the fact that Jaws was considered this giant man-eating machine, and then you have basking sharks that are the ones in reality just kind of floating around.
They are apex predators.
They are. That's true.
So with what you're doing in Ireland, how long have you been there? How long has this study been going?
So I started going to Ireland during my PhD, and I went for the first time in 2017. I will be back in a few weeks for the International Basking Shark Conference that I'm helping to organize, and that will be, I think, my 10th trip over there. I've been studying them for quite a long time. I had a little COVID break, and then I started to go back. The first couple years, though, the first 3 years I went during my PhD, it almost totally derailed my entire project because I didn't see almost any. And this is a really interesting feature of the species is they kind of tend to come in booms and busts in different places. You can never predict when and where they're going to show up. We might have an idea, and we've been pretty good at predicting them recently, but they could disappear and we'd have no idea where they went. And that did happen to me during my PhD, which was a huge bummer. So if anyone out there is doing their PhD or their master's and something's going wrong, I can totally relate.
Any idea why they shift so much their numbers like that?
It's something that I'm actually working on now, which is trying to figure out what environmental features might predict better that they're going to show up. And there are certainly some features that do. So the presence of plankton, no brainer, right? They're coming to eat. a lot of the time. Water temperature is like sort of an okay predictor, depending on, again, we talked about the fact that they can kind of occupy a lot of different temperatures. I think there's also some innate component of their brains. There's something happening that just brings them back to these places. But why basking sharks go where they go is a topic of global uncertainty, and it's something that a lot of researchers are trying to figure out because what we've learned is that there doesn't seem to be a pattern in who shows up where, right? Like sharks that have been tagged with satellite tags in Norway have gone, like I said, stayed in Norway, or some have gone to the Azores. Some in Ireland have come across to Cape Cod. Some in Cape Cod have gone down to Brazil. But you never know who's going to go where. And I think that's something that we just got a lot of funding to start to learn about.
So my wife's from Brazil, and recently she showed me a video of a basking shark in Brazil that completely surprised me because I didn't realize that they went that far south.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that there's a lot that we still don't know about them. The fact that they go to Brazil is like not something that's overly discussed, at least in the researchers in kind of the northern hemisphere. But we are going to have representatives from researchers from Brazil in Ireland in a couple weeks at the Basking Shark Conference. And so I'm hoping to learn a lot more from them there.
Well, you did capture something very, very rare, the first of its kind, and it was the basking shark that got struck by a boat, correct? Am I, that's what
Yep.
happened, right? I remember it. Here's the CNN article about it. Well, I'll let you explain. Tell me what happened here.
Yeah, so this was pretty wild. This happened last year. So we have been actually conducting a study on how these animals are eating, right? Like they swim around with their mouths open all the time. That's like swimming around with a parachute strapped to you. It's probably pretty energetically costly. So we've been trying to figure out how they offset that cost, how much plankton they might need to eat. Maybe they only open their mouths to feed when there's enough plankton around. Again, we were trying to study something pretty unrelated to what we actually ended up finding for this study. We had what's called an animal-borne camera on them, plus an accelerometer. So what that means is essentially attached to the body, we had an animal Fitbit. And that allows us to understand more about energy based on how the body is moving. It also allows us to kind of look at their behaviors. And then behind that, we were towing a camera. And that allowed us to observe kind of when those gills were opening, meaning they were feeding versus closing. And we don't have these on many animals. In fact, this was the only tag we had out at the time. And they're not on for very long because we have to get them back to get the data. So we ended up recovering the tag after 20 hours or so. And we were at the pub, look, as we do in Ireland, looking at the footage. And, you know, we were looking at a later component of the footage to just kind of get a sense of what we were going to see. And I noticed that there was some blue paint on the shark. And that's not uncommon. We know that basking sharks rub up against the like hulls of vessels and there's anti-fouling paint. So sometimes we see sharks with paint on them. But then we jumped to an earlier clip and there was no paint. And we said, something has happened here that we have somehow caught on camera. And then when we found what it was very jarring. We had observed a ship hit the shark, which we sort of suspected had happened. You know, we do see basking sharks around with propeller marks on their fins and scrapes on their back, and of course the paint. But to get it on camera, I mean, what are the odds of that? It was pretty shocking. And so after the shark got hit, it had been feeding before. It does this kind of evasive maneuver. You see it kind of try to get out of the way, and then it gets hit. It kind of tumbles around, and then it bolts to the seafloor. And kind of what we say that it like rests there, but they swim to breathe. So it kind of just moves really slowly for the rest of the deployment. And then the tag was programmed to pop off. So we actually don't know what ended up happening afterwards.
Do you know how fast? Can you estimate how fast the boat struck it, or is that almost impossible?
It's really hard to say. And I think it's something we've been considering because there aren't a lot of enforceable rules in this area regarding, ship activity and
Hmm.
speed. We're often out there and seeing boats speed around. So it's hard to tell it's hard to tell basically based on just that footage alone. We do know that it was a fairly big boat. It was a power boat. So It's just hard to say, but I do suspect that this is definitely happening more frequently than we had even initially thought. Just given the fact that we only had one tag out on one day and it gets hit within hours, it's something I think that collectively as a scientific community we need to be considering much more.
I can tell you that the sharks get, at least in my opinion here, my experience here is that the white sharks definitely get hit more frequently than I ever imagined. And I would assume with a creature as big as a basking shark who basks out on the surface of the water, I'm sure that happens a lot.
Yeah, it's crazy because that, as far as we could tell, was the first time an animal with a tag had actually gotten hit, or we'd been able to document it, obviously. But when I saw your clip, I thought that was insane because your clip came out essentially within a year of us figuring out that this was happening on basking sharks. And again, the literature is pretty sparse. Like there's
Mm,
some information and some interest in kind of mapping where the animals are going, overlaying with ship traffic. So there's some interest in kind of learning about the probability that they're overlapping, but to document the actual strike is a hard thing to do. So when that came out, when you saw the white shark get hit, I thought that was kind of wild. These are two totally different species in two different locations
mhm.
in the world, and we're seeing sort of the same phenomenon. So yeah, that was nuts to me as well.
You know, what's wild is because my last video was the boat strike on that shark. And that was a speedboat going pretty fast. Smashes right into the shark. And I think in the video I say out of the vastness of the ocean, how these two objects met, how the boat, it's kind of you can't comprehend it because there's so much space in the water, but it happens so much, especially here where I'm observing. I see the strikes all the time. I had a shark that almost lost its complete dorsal fin last year, and you can see the prop strike right through it. That particular shark had a tendency to get closer to humans, which was very interesting. And it
Mhm.
made me wonder if this shark is at a disadvantage now. Is it now more likely to go after low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, go after low-hanging fruit in what sense?
Well, go after, be more curious, because we're humans are very inefficient in the water compared to what sharks typically hunt, right?
Mhm.
So, could a shark that has that kind of injury be more prone to taste, testing out what a human is, right?
You mean it's
It's just it's a thought. It could also be the opposite effect too, but still, the boat strikes and our effect on them, it can't be ignored. We're causing some significant damage to some animals.
For sure, I definitely think so. And I think, with white sharks in particular, I think that if obviously, like we talked about this a lot last week, if we were on their menu in any way, we would know it.
Hmm.
I think what's very cool in the animal behavior world is that there are animals that are bold. That's literally a scientific term. They're bold, much like people. They have a personality, and then there's animals that are shy. So it's certainly possible that animals that are bold are more exploratory, could be encountering threats like ship strikes more, while those that are shy are maybe less prone to doing it. But I do not know, I don't think that would have any bearing on whether they encounter humans in the water
Hmm.
more. But I do agree that this is something that I think people definitely need to be paying more attention to.
For sure, because I mean, one of the most watched videos I had last year was that particular shark going right up to some swimmers, right up to it, closer than any shark I've witnessed
Hmm.
last year, and then multiple times doing this to individuals, whereas other sharks nearby weren't doing that same behavior. So it kind of sparked that question. I think it's in the realm of possibility that maybe a shark that's injured would be more prone to approaching humans. But then again, maybe it was approaching humans to begin with. Who knows? You can't really tell, right?
You can't really tell. I think the other thing too, which I really like about your videos is, they're around and they're like, we don't see a lot of harmful human wildlife interactions at all, given the amount that they're around. And what was crazy last week is we were just off the coast, right? Like it's not like we were very far. We could see swimmers in the water. There were sharks all around. They were not interested at all in anybody. They were not interested in us. which we know because we were interested in them and they kept leaving us. But I do think the thing that we're thinking about now is not, interactions with humans necessarily, but the impact, like the in terms of injury, right? Like how severe are these injuries? And for the basking shark, we did see like a scrape at the top of the body, but there's more than one way to be impacted by a ship strike, right? You've described like seeing dorsal fins almost chopped off. We've seen dorsal fins get those prop marks as I described. Same with the back. You see some marks on the back. And that's certainly a physical manifestation of kind of these interactions. But another thing we're concerned about is like what's happening inside the body. And a ship strike as big as the one we saw in the basking shark, there could have been huge internal injuries we didn't know about. And then there's what we call, it's called like a sublethal behavioral effect. And all that means is that, to your point, animals can adjust their behaviors. Like they can maybe, for example, with a basking shark, it stopped feeding. That's a really important behavior for basking sharks, right? They're basically shark vegetarians. They have to like constantly be eating like a cow. So when we stop their feeding, that's also very bad for them. Even if the ship strike itself, didn't cause a lethal injury, the fact that they stop feeding is also a really bad thing. So affecting their behaviors really matters too. And to really learn about that, you do have to kind of keep observing them after the strike and kind of learn more about what normal behavior looked like for them even before the strike. And getting this large snapshot of information from sharks is so challenging.
So that shark that got struck, the basking shark, were you able to? How long after it got struck, or after the device popped off the camera, did you just lose the shark? It, do you have any idea where it could be?
We don't know. Yeah. So it didn't resume normal behavior at all for the rest of the deployment. So it recorded for hours after that shark got hit and then it popped up like it was supposed to. Um,
So
so
when you mean normal behavior, you're saying it was feeding and then it just went down in the water column and just hung out, just didn't do anything?
yep, just kind of roamed on the seafloor. And we've just got video of it kind of just swimming really slowly along it.
That's so sad.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
So pretty traumatic. Do we have any, or do you have any idea how many basking? I know population models are super hard, but any idea what the basking numbers are in Ireland?
We don't know. There have been some recent studies that have come out. I think we're talking like similar to estimates of white sharks in Central California. We're talking on the order of hundreds, not thousands. But I would like to see a more robust kind of population estimate come out before we can say for sure. And the reason it's so hard to get those is you have to get a lot of information on kind of how these sharks live, like how many babies they have, how old they get to be, and getting those numbers is really hard. There's other ways you can start to guess that, like putting tags on the animals and seeing how often they come back. But funding has been really sparse for that type of work. Basking sharks were not in Jaws, and so they haven't gotten the same level of attention or public interest. But I am really hoping to shift that such that more people are intrigued by these ocean giants that are endangered and really could use our help.
And when you're talking about a population of in the hundreds instead of in the thousands, now that's just regionally what you believe maybe in Ireland?
And I think that would apply globally, is my guess. So
Yeah.
again, there haven't really been a lot of global estimates. There was one probably 20 years ago now that again estimated hundreds. We do know that basking sharks move around quite a bit. So, like we were talking about, the ones in Ireland could be the same as the ones in Cape Cod, could be the same as the ones in Brazil, could be the same as the ones in the Mediterranean. They're all moving and mixing, at least kind of on the Atlantic side. The Pacific side is much less known. As far as I'm aware, there's only a handful of papers documenting their presence along the US and North American West Coast. I don't know much about them across the Pacific, and I think that that is potentially something that we should be looking at when we're thinking about why it's been hard for them to recover here, because we don't know what threats they're facing over there. We don't know what threats they're facing in the high seas. Certainly, they're being targeted. I mean, their fins are huge. They can garner quite a large amount in the shark fin market. So I think there's a lot that we still have to learn, particularly on the Pacific side.
I've never thought about the shark fin market, but it is, I guess, a topic that has to be considered, considering how big their fins are.
For sure. And again, it's really hard to quantify how often these animals are being targeted for that because, studying sharks in the high seas outside of the jurisdiction of a single country is so challenging, and monitoring who's taking what out there is really hard. So, I'm not, accusing anybody of taking basking sharks, but I do think that that is something that we need to pay attention to and start to learn more about.
Now, here's a question for you. Why basking? Why should we care about basking sharks?
I get that question a lot, because despite the fact that they're an apex predator, they don't necessarily have the same effect on the population as like a white shark does, right? When we think about white sharks, we think about them keeping prey populations in check and making sure there's not too many marine mammals eating all the resources in an area. That's a harder sell for basking sharks, obviously, because plankton is kind of this constantly renewing resource. So I think it just depends on what you value. I think there's a lot of discussion about just valuing nature for what it is, keeping them in our environment, just keeping any animal from going extinct, that's its own sort of value. For them in particular, though, I think it's important to look at basking sharks as a climate indicator. So they obviously are very closely linked to the base of the food chain. So when they're around, that means that there's a lot of productivity in the water. It's usually a good sign for that area. So when basking sharks start to disappear from areas where they used to be, that's when I think we might start paying attention. That could be a warning sign or an orange flag or a red flag, depending on where you are. The other thing basking sharks do is they travel huge distances. And I think a lot of people don't think about this, but sharks, when they move, they eat in one place and they poop in other places. And that's actually really important in terms of transporting nutrients, particularly if they're pooping in places like the high seas where there's not a ton. So they do that. They also transport other animals like lamprey as they move. That's sort of a new area of interest for some folks. So I think again, they're climate indicators. They do serve important what we call ecosystem functions as they move and they poop and they eat. Like that's all very important to local ecosystems as well. So very similar to sort of baleen whales, whales that also filter feed. Paying attention to those populations is going to be really important if we want to conserve the ecosystems around them.
Well, you can't get a better answer than that.
Thank you.
So how do we help you out? How can we help basking sharks, help the research, and help support what you're doing?
I really appreciate that question, Carlos. I think the hardest part about basking sharks is because they're so big, studying them requires a lot of innovation, and that innovation is expensive. And I know I'm sure people are getting really tired of the whole scientists need money pitch, but for basking sharks in particular, we really can't do the research without some sort of financial support. And we very recently got funding from the Paul M. Angel Foundation to do some of the work in Ireland. And that work, I think, is going to be really critical to the conservation of this species globally moving forward because we're going to be able to study them and help inform their protection, working with a lot of folks over there in one of the only places where you can still see them. So if you're able and interested, you can reach out to us or donate on the Big Fish Lab page. I also co-coordinate the Irish Basking Shark Group, which is a sort of volunteer organization over in Ireland that specifically focuses on education and outreach and research surrounding the basking sharks there. If you are not able to donate, that's totally fine. Even just reporting your sightings, if you're in Ireland, please report them via the Irish Basking Shark Group page. But if you're over here in the US, again, we don't have a centralized database, but you should definitely feel free to reach out to me directly if you're starting to see animals, because for me, this is the next area of research that I am really interested in pursuing.
And I'm going to put a link to all that information in the video description below for you guys. If you can support all the research you can, not just in shark science, but in general science right now, it's very tough, especially in this environment where a lot of scientific progress has been halted here in the United States because of cuts to research. Things that we find out about sharks can affect your everyday life. There's studies about the lifespan of sharks, the DNA genomes of Greenland sharks, for example, are being researched right now to help prolong our human lives. And so, while this doesn't have a direct impact on you right now, there are some things that we can discover within sharks that can end up benefiting humankind and the general ecosystem. So go out there and support. science, shark science, marine biology, and I keep looking at your dog back there. I don't want to bore her, but
Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is Mako. He's very scary looking, obviously. I
he,
will
oh yeah,
our second dog because
he
I'm
fell asleep. He fell asleep to my pitch there. But yeah,
tired of hearing
let,
about basking sharks.
but support shark science. Alex, I really enjoyed spending time with you and learning and picking your brain about sharks and white sharks and basking sharks last year or last week. Seems like last year. Time flies so fast, huh? Is there anything you want to kind of talk about before we wrap up?
I don't think so, Carlos. It's obviously been a pleasure getting to know you, and I'm a huge fan of obviously your work. So thank you, I think, for representing the value of community science, and I hope other folks can start to see that and think about the ways that they can contribute as well.
And, a quick reminder, all of you guys can be a citizen scientist. Make sure to use the resources that I'm going to put in the links below. If you see a basking shark, especially in California, don't just post it on your social media. Reach out to Alex because that is data that you as a citizen scientist can help compile. And who knows, you could be included in the next research paper that can make a big difference in understanding a species that we really don't know much about.
For sure. Yeah,
But
definitely get in touch. But otherwise, yeah, thank you so much, Carlos, for having me.
of course, and looks like we're going to be working together in the future again. And I look forward to that. And maybe we can capture one of those shark breaches finally right next to us.
Yeah, we'll do our best. Fingers crossed for the next time. I'll pay better attention.
Okay, I'm counting on you. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.